Welcome, everyone. So wonderful to be with all of you. We will be starting very shortly. So welcome, everyone. We're very happy to be with all of you. In the second meeting of our Nourishing Feminist Advocacy collective learning sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about making sure that we're building the right key and core messages, and that we're building effective alliances to make sure that our feminist advocacy moves along. Before we begin, please let me remind you some of the accessibility and logistics notes. We have interpretation to Spanish and French, so please select the language you would like to listen and speak in the meeting. At the bottom of your screens, from the Zoom control bar, you can select the globe sign and then select the language you want to use during the meeting. If you are going to be listening and speaking in this meeting in English, please also select the English channel so our interpreters can do their work more easily. Please do not remain in the off channel. I will be going to the English channel right after I finish the announcements. I will be your accessibility and safety coordinator in this call, so you can always write to me in chat if you have any accessibility issues, safety and connection concerns. I'd also like to note that the meeting is only open for the Women's Major Group members, as usual, but we are recording the first part of our meeting, and we will be sharing it in our YouTube channel, as well as the Women's Major Group curriculum we're developing and hoping to launch before this HLPF. The open discussion section at the very end will not be recorded, so we can have our conversations in an open and safe space. Sorry, as always, discriminatory remarks, hate speech, the denial of self-proclaimed identities, anti-racist discourse, and other forms of discrimination against the folks and groups speaking in these meetings will not be tolerated. If such an incident occurs, the person will be removed from the Zoom platform after one warning. And our brief agenda for today is here. We have incredible Women Major Groups members and experts joining us today to share their knowledge and expertise. And we're very grateful for them for the time they've spared for us today. So without further ado, let me pass the floor to our Anglophone Africa organizing partner and the Executive Director of Education as a Vaccine, Toyin, to moderate our meeting. Toyin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sehnaz. Welcome everybody once again to another session of our webinars. As the Women's Major Group, we had proposed to continue our monthly meeting series by undertaking initiatives, collective, sessions like this one with our members in the 2022. I'm sorry for the background noise. So on different feminist advocacy strategies, and we are very happy to hear that, the feedback on how well this has people have taken this and how much our members have found the first session on language advocacy very helpful. So we're happy to hear that. And this month, we want to look into two other important aspects of feminist advocacy, building key messages and building alliances for stronger today. So we will start with developing key or core messages, and we want to look at that. And we have a lineup of amazing feminist speakers who would be discussing this, and we're going to be taking from their expertise today to learn more about this. So Bigda, Lindsay Bigda serves as communications lead. She speaks to support and amplify feminist voices and solutions at the intersection of gender and environment justice. Before joining WEDO, Lindsay worked with the International Center for Research on Women, where she served as the Advocacy Initiative, where she led communications for the coalition's newly created gender justice program. Lindsay, thank you for coming. We wanted to start off with answering the question, why is it important to develop core messages, and what are the tips for developing core messages? Lindsay, you have the floor now.
Thanks so much, Twain, and thanks to Sehnaz and the Women's Major Group for one, creating a space, a dedicated space for messaging and comms, and two, for inviting me to be a part of this. Very much appreciate it. I have a very short 5 slides that I wanted to share with you, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen and let me know if you can't see. So just to give a very kind of high level orientation to key messages and sort of why we care about it, why we're talking about it today, I wanted to just kind of ground us very quickly in where key messages might sit in like an overarching communications plan, because it's hard to talk about key messages without talking about audiences and kind of why we're doing this work. So just very briefly to say that when we're thinking about creating a communications strategy, whether that's, you know, for like a 5-year plan or a shorter term engagement such as CSW, which many of us are involved in, we want to kind of start from the left and work our way over to the right. So thinking about our overarching communications goals and then our audiences. So who do we need to take action and what do we want them to know? From there, we can go ahead and build our key messages, thinking about what information will inspire that audience to take action. And then kind of that all gets translated into tactics. So when we have those 3 main building blocks, then we kind of think about what messengers do these people trust and what's the best time to reach them? And, you know, how can I reach them? Is it through internal comms or an opinion piece or a social media strategy or another? So why do we care about key messages? Why create them in the first place? I wanted to just highlight 3 reasons why this is important. One, that we want to have a clear and consistent narrative over time. So a lot of times I hear people in our world saying, like, I'm bored and I keep repeating the same messages over and over. And this is actually really important for us to have kind of a core set of simple and replicable messages, so that we can sort of set a foundation for comms and that we can create and socialize our ideas out in the world. And that in turn opens up doors for advocacy, for funding, for resourcing, for us to do the work that we're trying to do in the world. Key messages also help us be agile and top of mind in the near term. So the more that we have key messaging to draw from, the quicker we can respond in key moments, you know, to breaking news, or we can kind of more quickly respond to our partners' needs and put pressure on advocacy targets. And then of course, we want to better tell our story and share our victories. And then a couple of characteristics of compelling key messages to keep in mind and just to ground ourselves in. One is that they should be clear and concise. So again, we want them to be simple and kind of as free of jargon as possible. We want them to be honest and authentic. We want to be sincere, have our messages, you know, grounded in data and science and lived experience of our partners. We want to make sure our messages connect with audience values. And specifically in the climate world, we often see that like moral arguments or naming and shaming are not as effective as things that will kind of be really grounded in audiences' values and kind of motivators. And then we want to make sure that they also kind of elicit emotion. So we see in the climate world that things that are very negative and sad, or on the flip side, that are positive and inspiring and hopeful, kind of get people's attention more than just data. This is a very kind of simple framework or a way to think about taking steps to creating key messages. So as we talked about in the beginning, the first thing is just defining our communications goals at a high level, right? So what are our needs? Are they short-term, long-term? Who are our target audiences? The next step would be to kind of draft and refine our key messaging. again, keeping in mind, ensuring messages are clear and simple and conversational. And then the third step is, as much as we can, sometimes we don't have capacity, but to kind of test and refine our messages. So we can test them with some target audiences, we can test them within our own movements, and kind of figure out what is resonating and then update them as we have more information. And then the last thing I wanted to share is just a kind of framework that sometimes we use in the communications world that we call like the messaging house. And so we can think about building a house of key messages with the roof being like our overarching top line umbrella statement. So the simplest message we have. We think about building 3 key messages and not more, because like, again, psychology kind of says that humans, whether you're presenting or whether you're receiving information, are generally not able to retain more than like 3 main points at a time. And then we can kind of bolster those messages with evidence, proof, examples, etc. So that was kind of a lot of framing and just some tools that we can use to think through key messaging, but I did want to put those out there as we move through the topic, and just to have that kind of as a framework in our heads, I guess, to start the conversation with. And with that, I'll pass back to you. And I think I'm passing to some colleagues from JASS and IWDA and Womankind Worldwide, who will kind of lead us through some more concrete exercises to develop messages.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, for taking us through that. It was short and precise, just like, the points you're trying to make with your presentation about communication. Is profiling the audience and understanding what they need to take action on whatever it is we're asking of them. Size, grounded in evidence and data, and find ways to connect to the audience. If we understand the audience, to connect with the audience and make sure our message is eliciting emotions. Now we have our colleagues at IWDA and Womankind that will be talking to us about their important advocacy points on developing messages. Clara from IWDA will be coming to us due to the issues of time differences, time zone differences. Clara will tell us about core messages and then add to the points Lindsay has already spoken to us about. So now, Sehnaz, you can play Clara's video message. Thank you. Are you ready? I can just say a little bit about Clara, because for people who don't know Clara,
please
she
go
lives
ahead.
on the lands of Cuckoo, and okay, yes, while you're trying to sort that out, lands
That
of
will
the
be
Cuckoo.
great. Thank you, Sonia.
She's an advocacy and policy professional with experience in human rights law, gender, social justice, legal ethics, environmental sustainability, and transitional justice mechanisms. Excuse me, excuse me. Clara is also skilled in community engagement. She's skilled in research and analysis and strategic advocacy, and campaigning with a wide-ranging work experience in the non-for-profit sector. Strong cross-cultural decolonization are also some skills that Clara has. She's highly motivated and driven by a strong sense of social and environmental justice with this video that she's recorded already. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toyin. So I'm beginning. Please let me know if you can hear it well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clara Bradley, and I'm an advocacy advisor at International Women's Development Agency. I live on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Australia. So sorry that I'm not able to attend the Women's Major Group meeting in person. In lieu of my presence, I have recorded a short presentation for you. I wanted to briefly talk about some of the tools IWDA has developed to support feminist organisations develop core messaging for strategic advocacy. Womankind and IWDA came together to develop an advocacy toolkit for women's rights organisations called Plan Your Power. Plan Your Power is a fabulous tool for designing strategic advocacy. It takes a women's rights approach, meaning it has a stronger focus on power analysis. It recognises the need for longer-term structural change to challenge and transform the barriers of unequal power relations and structures, rather than just climbing over them. So IWDA's partners expressed desire for us to run advocacy workshops using this tool. So we developed a 3- and 5-day workshop, which we deliver to women's rights organisations. It is designed to provide participants with a collective framework to think about women's rights in their context and to design a strategic plan together as a group. After running a number of the Plan Your Power workshops, we reflected on the diversity of the participants, including their different skill sets, how they learn, and their level of knowledge and experience of advocacy. We also reflected on the inherent power imbalances that exist in organisations, even in feminist ones. We wanted every participant to feel prepared and able to contribute in workshop. So we designed an online learning course that we offer all workshop participants prior to coming together as a group. I want to briefly share with you a snapshot of the online course, specifically module 3.6, developing core messages. Just give me a second, I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Developing core messages is the final step in the advocacy planning process. Now, your core message, it must persuade others, particularly your targets. A core message should include what, when, why, and how to act for change. It must capture people's attention and persuade them of your argument. So this exercise, it presumes that you've done some power mapping and have identified your targets and allies. It also presumes you have thought about what influences them. When developing core messages, we start by first breaking it down into smaller parts. Why is change important? What evidence do you have to support it? What would solve the problem? And what is the action needed? Who is responsible for solving the problem? Now we put these 4 parts together to develop our core message. I just wanted to provide you with an example of a core message. So here we have, why is change important? Sexual violence against women and children in Cambodia is a major violation of their human rights. Evidence, World Health Organization research found 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. What would solve the problem? Resources are needed to help communities to prevent and respond to sexual violence. Action needed. The government must increase the funding for addressing gender-based violence in the next budget. So when you pull these all together, you have sexual violence affects 1 in 3 women and children in Cambodia and is a major violation of their human rights. Resources are needed to help communities to prevent and respond to sexual violence. The government must increase the funding for addressing gender-based violence in the next budget. So once you have your core message, you can tailor it or frame it for different targets. A target may be a power holder, an influencer, or it may even be one of your allies, designed to inspire and to sustain them. When you frame for different targets, the core message should remain the same, but the tone, length, and style will depend on your audience. As an example, when you frame your message for an individual decision maker, you may want to frame your message to speak to politicians at risk of losing power by talking about the potential support they could gain by acting on your issue. When you're speaking to the general public, you can't really go wrong with a slogan, and they also double as social media hashtags. Unfortunately, that's my time is up, but if you are interested in any of the tools that IWDA has, I've provided a flyer and it's got my email address on it, so please just reach out with any questions that you might have. I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you.
We thank Clara for sharing that with us. I'm sure this toolkit will be a great resource for many of us in the work that we do, including leading up to the HLPF and advocacy that we do moving forward. Now, Dinah Musindawezo from Womankind will lead us through an exercise from their joint training. And Dinah is a feminist and gender and development expert who is passionate about creating an environment, systems, and structures that work favorably for all women and girls without any form of discrimination. Before joining Womankind Worldwide, Dinah was the executive director of FEMINISTS. FEMINISTS is a Pan-African feminist network of women's rights organizations and individual activists. Currently, Dinah serves on UN Women East and Southern Africa Regional Civil Society Advisory Group. She's a board member of Amplify Change Fund and Article 19 Eastern Horn of Africa Regional Office and Trust for Indigenous Culture and Health, TICA. Dinah, if you can hear me, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to join this group and great work that you're doing for convening such important spaces such as this one. And so, so as you have already heard, this is a toolkit that we have collaborated Womankind Worldwide together with International Women's Development Agency to really developed that is focusing on supporting and working with women rights organizations in different countries to support their capacity on areas of policy and advocacy. And so today, talking about developing of messages, we have already heard from the video of what is really important when you are thinking about developing advocacy messages. And I think to add on to what has already been said, is also, before we go into groups, is really to think about also the aims, like what are your objective aims, because it's really difficult to develop core messages if you don't know what your advocacy aim is. So usually this is an exercise that takes a long period of time. Because when we developed this toolkit, actually we were still in the world where people come together in a workshop and not on a computer, but in the physical space. And so the thinking was within that time. And so we are going to use less time, but I encourage you to still at the back of your mind really or actually discuss very briefly in your groups what your advocacy aim is. But also what are the values that guide your advocacy, like, are you focusing on, are there values like, whether it is equality, transparency, accountability, inclusivity, all those kind of values that are really key in policy and advocacy, to think about those when developing core messages. But also to going back to then when you start developing messages, to think about the why, the what, and when, and for which audience.
Thanks, Dinah. I also thank you, Clara, for sharing this with us. Now we'll be turning to Justice Associate Adelaide Mazwarira. She is a Zimbabwean feminist writer and creative storyteller, something she brings to many of Justice Associates' communications, publications, and outreach efforts. Her passion for feminism and social justice grew from a young age, and she channeled this in her work and domestic violence survivors and research assistantships on violence against women. Adelaide currently works as the communications manager at Justice Associates and is based in South Africa. So Adelaide, can you help us understand how we should communicate key messages and what do we need to be careful about? Over to you.
Thank you. So I think in the previous presentations, we kind of touched on the how a little bit, right, in terms of the importance of having a communication strategy that really defines some of those aims and audiences and the different tools or mediums that you will use depending on what you're trying to achieve with your communication. So I will focus a bit more on some of the things that we must be careful about. And it's not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things, at least from JASS's perspective, that are that we've come across and are constantly conscious of. A big one is, safety and security, particularly when you are, in your communications, if you are, using images, or if you are using, particular quotes from women activists or, community leaders that you work with. And it's important to get consent for those, even though you've maybe had consent before, to ask again. Sometimes I notice more and more that people, organizations are using more kind of illustrations more to do their messaging, particularly, imagery around memes or GIFs, because it's safer and doesn't put activists at risk. Because sometimes in contexts that are repressive or where there's a lot of surveillance and monitoring, it's actually dangerous to put activists spaces or on blast. And also, if you are going to use images of activists, sometimes it's we've used more like collective images as opposed to an individual activist, because it targets them more. Sometimes having collective images is less threatening, but also is actually illustrative of the work on the ground that people, work together in change, and that it's never an individual person. So that's something important. I think another aspect also of safety and security, and this will probably comes up when you do is a IWDA mentioned, and we do around when you conduct a power analysis to identify what are your target audiences, the risks around that, is sometimes, targeting specific governments may not be strategic or an effective strategy, that it may actually put activists on it, in further risk, or actually target you as an organization that's supporting that constituency. And so it's always important to see, to identify what, target audience makes sense based on that power analysis, so that you're not putting activists in further risk. And that if you are targeting specific governments, and that to be very careful about the language that you use, particularly for specific contexts. And so to be mindful of those things, and so to always assess whether it's effective or strategic in terms of the end goal of what you're trying to achieve. So as you see, right, just as we would approach safety and security in terms of the actual work of supporting activists, organizing, capacity on the ground, it's also how do we employ some of those principles, even in terms of how we communicate. Another important one, which Lisa kind of alluded to in her question, is around narratives, that we have to be very careful around, in our communications, in terms of tone, in terms of language, images, that we are not reinforcing particular images that, or narratives that further stigmatize the constituencies that we work with, or, portray them as victims, or any other harmful narratives that you find in terms of your work. And so part of communications also is to really understand, one, the narratives that are out there, but also how to reframe them and portray them, the messaging in a way that doesn't further reinforce or add risk. And so to be mindful of those things. Otherwise, in relation to advocacy, then it doesn't make much of an impact, or in general, if we say the same things that are already out there. And so part of it is how to challenge and change those narratives. I think another one too, is for communications to be constantly adaptive, right? Because you can have a plan, but then to be aware constantly of how things are shifting and how you can, adapt to that. And that may require a different strategy than the one you initially planned in order to respond to that message, to that context. And so constantly adapting to the context is important. And I'll end there. I think that we can share, like JASS produced an ICT toolkit with APC and Women's Net around ICTs for movement building. And so we'll share that after, and you can learn all the ins and outs around communications with ICTs for different purposes, including advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelaide. Thanks a lot. So now we will turn to the second section of our meeting, where we're going to talk about building alliances for stronger advocacy. And Sehnaz will tell us about the alliance of the Women's Major Group and other feminist allied constituencies in UN policy spaces. Sehnaz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Toyin. I will try to keep it very brief. I'm sorry that I need to talk instead of our members for this, but many of the feminist allied constituencies we have been working with are actually working on their own UN policy processes. So what we have been doing as the feminist allied constituencies in different UN policy spaces, 10 constituencies to be exact at this point, but we might be growing, is to start to show that we are standing in solidarity for the policy spaces that we're in, that we support each other's work in the different policy spaces and we amplify the work they have. So what we did, for example, during the Generation Equality Forum in Paris was that we had a side event to reach out to the other feminist and women's rights organizations in that space to kind of show what our key demands are and that we exist in these spaces, and doing UN advocacy through these constituencies is always more kind of strengthening and empowering for many of us. We are working on kind of amplifying our messages in, for example, as a Women's Major Group in our position paper, we have asked for resources from our feminist allied constituents to make sure that we can quote them and actually benefit from their expertise as well and have a similar narrative in the position paper we're preparing for HLPF 2022. So just wanted to tell all of you, all of our members, that this work is happening, that we have a strong connection between different UN policy spaces and the feminist groups working in those spaces. And we are looking very much forward to continuing our solidarity and support with these groups. Thank you so much, Toyin. I can give the floor back to you.
Thanks, Sehnaz. Thank you very much. Yes, we know that it sometimes appears easier to build alliances between feminists, but we also know that's not always enough. We need to build alliances across movements, whether they are local, national, regional, or global, towards the system change that we need for a just world. So we want to talk about how this can be done. And April from APWLD will share their experiences with the Asia Pacific Regional Engagement Mechanism. April is currently the Feminist Development Justice Program Officer at Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. Before she joined APWLD, April worked with groups working on food sovereignty, environment, disaster justice, human rights, and child rights. In 2017, April was elected as the Asia Pacific Regional CSO representative to the UN Environmental Assembly, where she also represented the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. And in her role, she was also part of the founding of the Asia Pacific Network on Environment Defenders, building solidarity and linkages on issues of environment and human rights and development justice in the region. She's currently based in Manila, and she's a mom to a 7-month-old baby girl. April, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I have some slides that I could share. Yes, so, okay, here you can see my screen. Oh, it's not big enough.
Yep,
okay,
we're seeing it.
Okay, so I am going to share on building alliances across movements. Oh, and thank you to the Women's Major Group for organizing this very relevant webinar, especially right now, no, that everything's, I mean, there are not so good things happening around the world. So this presentation, I will particularly share on the experience of the Asia Pacific RSEM, where APWLD is also currently the co-chair and also one of the founding members. So yeah, just to give you a background on APRSEM, well, this is in the website, but just to reiterate that the Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism is not just a platform engaging for Agenda 2030, but it also wants to represent the voice of the grassroots and people's movements to advance development justice. So this is actually important for us because development justice is our transformative, well, we could say this is our messaging, the message. This is our uniting principle on how and why we engage with the different development processes, particularly Agenda 2030. So what is development justice? It is a transformative framework for development that aims to reduce inequalities of wealth, power, and resources between countries, between rich and poor, and between men and women and other social groups. So this is a collective demand, a collective call, wherein regional groups, people's organizations from the region are deliberated and discussed and basically come up and develop the principles of development justice. So just to show to you, these are the 5 transformative shifts. I won't discuss what each of them, but it's in the website of APRSEM. But basically, yeah, as I mentioned, APRSEM is not just a platform, but unified with these different principles. So why am I actually explaining this? Because it's important to know how APRSEM actually started, and why are we engaging, and how do we basically relate with different movements and build solidarity across movements. So just to show to you, APRSEM is not, it did not follow the 9 major group system of the UN, but it has 17 constituencies where we actually included more of the marginalized groups in the region. So as you can see, we have people affected by conflict and disaster, older persons, urban poor, etc. So just, I think I missed, yes, sorry, I missed a slide. So sorry, just to show to you a brief story of APRSEM, and we want to show to you that it's actually built by the movement. So in 2012, civil society organizations in the Rio Plus 20 are, especially from the region, are already discussing and have these collective assessments on how CSOs will be more effective engaging the post-2015 agenda. So with that, there were civil society or CSO meetings held, and basically APRSEM was created. So in 2013, 2014, it is the time of shaping the movement. An interim committee was formed. there was also 2 CSO forums organized by Asia Pacific. So from 75 in May 2014, it grew to 120 in May 2015. And it's also the first time that a regional coordination council was elected. And as I mentioned, instead of 9, we have 17 constituencies representing different sectors and marginalized groups. So 2018 and beyond, up to now, so we could say that APRSM actually received some recognitions, and we already supported some movement building. So in 2017, we were invited by the UN Environment to organize the MGSF, or the Major Group and Other Stakeholder Forum, which is the CSO Forum 3 in 2018. The membership grew to 600. So and of course, every CSO forum, there's about 150 attending physically before. Right now, with the People's Forum online, there are more actually attending and able to access via Zoom. And as I mentioned, specifically in terms of linking with other movements, APRSM was also able to support the formation of the Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders, which is a separate network right now. Also during that time where the killings are heightened in 2017, 2018, right, in the region. 2019, so from CSO Forum, we initiated People's Forum, which we actually, we thought that it could be more comprehensive and more in terms of discussing the struggles, in terms of tackling the struggles and building solidarities across different groups in the region. And in 2021, we launched the Asia Pacific People's Major Groups and Other Stakeholders Forum, which is the official CSO preparation for UNEA. So yeah, sorry, I missed that slide. And as I mentioned, these are the constituencies. So yeah, going now, I shared that because that's basically how we are doing, we are not just a platform. No, we are not just a platform engaging with the Agenda 2030 processes and other parallel processes, but it actually stemmed from the movements, and from the movements, it engaged, but at the same time, it's also supporting to build new movements. So the example I gave earlier was the Asia Pacific Network of Environment Defenders. So for example, these are some of the, like, we give solidarity to specific issues like on farmers, indigenous people, etc. So yeah, so with a precise roadmap, I think that is in terms of how did we build APRSM not just as a platform, but actually an alliance, you know, on and then building solidarity, is because of a roadmap and this framework of development justice, which is the unifying factor for the alliance, for the mechanism. And yeah, with that, we could say that it's actually not just a platform, but an alliance based on solidarity within and across movements. So women, feminist organizations in solidarity with farmers, with indigenous people. So we are able to do that through APRSM, and of course, engaging the grassroots with the different processes at the regional and global level. Yes, so that's for my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, April, right on time. So now we'll go to our colleagues at NGO CSW New York as they are preparing for the upcoming CSW 66. Ivy will talk to us about, Ivy Cook will talk to us about the advocacy part of the work. Ivy of the Soka Gaka International is program coordinator for the SGI Office for UN Affairs in New York. She's engaged in SGI's work in the fields of gender equality and women's empowerment, sustainable development, peace and disarmament and human rights, mainly through its non-formal education approach since joining in 2013. She has served on the NGO CSW Executive Committee since 2014. Currently, she's chair of the committee and co-chair of the Young Professional Subcommittee. Rosa Lizard is a Mexican-American feminist advocating for economic, environmental, gender, and racial justice. She currently serves as the Global Director of Feminist Task Force. a global women's rights coalition calling for Generation She. She's a founding member and the current co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development, a network which advocates for financing for gender equality, systemic reform, and global governance. Ivy and Rosa, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, I sent a little chat to Rosa to see if I can actually go first. We had originally switched it, but I'm gonna keep it very, very short since I have to leave and I know we're out of time. But
yes, thank you.
Yeah, the advocacy and research, is it okay, Rosa, that I'm gonna keep my part real short? The advocacy and work of NGO CSW. I think everyone is already aware of NGO CSW, but Rosa's gonna go into that in the forum in more detail. But advocacy work for the committee has started years ago on a regional basis, and there were trainings and advocacy done by the regions. And the NGO CSW New York was involved in advocacy in a little bit more, I would say, of a passive in the sense of researching and studying the issues, and as far as key messaging and all of that, was never organized as a committee until a few years ago. And then this past year, it was coordinated much more in advance before the zero draft, because there was advice given to us that we were working a little too late in the process as far as pushing key messages. And so the group met from the summer, and it's a global advocacy group from all over. And we came up with these advocacy points. You can find them on the website, and I'm going to not go through all of them, or I was going to share the link, but anyway, I will share the link later. And it also covers the other advocacy tools that we have. We also had a women's human rights well, it used to be called the compendium, and then it's a resource, it's an open resource, and there is a website for that. And we broke down the 10 or the 12, I should say, critical issues of the Beijing platform. So NGO CSW, as you know, consists not just of ECOSOC NGOs, but all other civil society organizations, and many of them are like grassroots organizations and NGOs. So they're not all well versed in the UN space. So definitely we have a very broad range of education and capacity. So we always try to work at a very practical level, I guess. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to just put the links so that you can look at them yourself. But I really, really thank Sehnaz and the Women's Major Group. We're so happy to be collaborating with you. So thank you.
Thanks, Rosa. Are you there?
Yeah, I'll just jump in here because I know we just have a few minutes. But just by way of background, because we switched here, just to highlight that, the NGO CSW, its main function is to facilitate a platform for voices and leadership of feminist and women's rights organizations globally, right? I mean, that we don't have one specific thematic issue that we promote, but our main job is to facilitate this platform. And I think in this sense, we are really appreciative of our alliances with the Women's Major Group and other feminist organizations and coalitions, because it really keeps us rooted in the aspect of our work that is focused on feminist analysis on feminist messaging. And I think we're an open platform, but it's really an area that we really, as the name of this session, we really want to nourish and nourish more. So the other thing is that we provide a space not only for ECOSOC accredited NGOs, but for all organizations, associations. And that's really, I'll talk about, three things. Well, one of them, Ivy already spoke about the recommendations, but the NGO forum, and then about some of our messaging and one advocacy effort. But the NGO forum is really the vehicle for facilitating a lot of this this work. And one, it's really rooted in inclusivity, right? And ensuring that it is a broad-based space for women's organizations, the women's movement, for feminists, for social transformation. We align with the priority themes of the session. And we're really committed to anti-racism. For the first time this year, there are two women of color heading the NGO CSW forum, and that's myself and my colleague Pamela Ransom. So we are really committed to ensuring the elimination of racism and breaking down barriers, anti-colonial barriers, and background. I do apologize. I'm getting a personal phone call on my personal line. So I may have to mute in just a minute and join you in a bit.
Meanwhile, maybe while Rosa is taking the call, I can help our interpreters. Unfortunately, we ran a little longer than expected, so our interpreters would need to leave, but we hope that you can join us in the off channel to listen to Rosa's continuance of Rosa's speech.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I could come back now because my voicemail was on. So one of the areas within the NGO forum is the issue of recommendations, which Ivy spoke about. And what I'm going to do is just put in the chat is the 6 recommendations that we have developed by input from global civil society, as well as the NGO CSW in the regions. That's Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, the MENA region, and then the Geneva and Vienna NGO CSWs. And we've also developed with our youth group recommendations by youth, which I'll put in the chat as well. Just mainly because we're running out of time, I just want to stress a couple of key messages that we are stressing during the CSW. And one of them is access and continued openness of the UN, particularly, at this time of the pandemic. It's of course, there are legitimate concerns for closing the UN for safety reasons, but it also provides an excuse for exclusion, for closing off to civil society, for limiting the access. But for us, it's also an opportunity to double and triple our efforts to push for an open UN and to unmute civil society, the CSW 66, and unmute civil society. So that's one of the areas. The other one is, as was mentioned earlier, is around safety, inclusivity, diversity, and protecting the space of the NGO forum for the diversity of voices that we host. And we have a zero tolerance policy around harassment of any type, and we're really pushing this in throughout the 2 weeks of the the forum. And the third message, which I really just want to end with this, it's really nourishing this feminist advocacy. I mentioned it, but I think, you know, sometimes we really just have to underscore the alliances with groups such as the Women's Major Group and the feminist coalitions. It's really important, and we're working behind the scenes with many around security and safety, and this is something that we really appreciate. Thank you so much.